Hello, and thanks for listening to Forward, a podcast about the compelling stories, important issues, and memorable art that move us. My name is Mari.
And my name is Christopher.
Thanks for joining us.
Today, we'll be touching on topics like the role of empathy and racial identity, and then talking about the implications of our insatiable appetite for content creation and consumption. Every episode, we'll start off with our weekly Article Forward, a segment where we'll share one article that made us think this week.
So there's this article from NPR's Code Switch, which is also a podcast. So there's a written element and a podcast element. If you're interested, you should listen to and read both. It's called Racial Imposter Syndrome. Here are your stories. So it's all about this idea of racial imposter syndrome for people who are mixed race, or maybe they come from multiple backgrounds or heritages. There's this feeling among a lot of people that they don't belong in any particular racial identity. And so that's what this article is all about. And what I thought really interesting about it was this idea of feeling like you deserve to claim a racial identity. And Chris, you know, I'm mixed race. This is something that I think about a lot. And how the idea of like racism and oppression is actually really critical to the identity of being a person of color. They don't get into that much in the article, but it was something that it made me think about, and something I think is really interesting, just in terms of, you know, what a racial identity is and like who can claim a racial identity, and even what the concept of race really means, because it is just a social construct after all. So check it out. It's called Racial Imposter Syndrome. Here are your stories. We're going to put a link in the SoundCloud description below.
The article I'm recommending is from The New Yorker, and it's aptly called, What If Parents Love Strangers' Children as Much as Their Own? It's written by Ted Chiang, who is an author you might not know the name of, but the title story from his first collection called Stories of Your Life and Others was actually adapted into the film Arrival. The story opens with Chiang recapping an interview author and philosopher Sam Harris had with Paul Bloom on his podcast, Waking Up. Bloom is a professor of philosophy at Yale, and he recently published this book called Against Empathy, The Case for Rational Compassion. On the podcast, they engage in this cool thought experiment, and they ask themselves, how would the world be improved if parents cared for each other's children just as much as they cared for their own children? It's a pretty provocative question, and more than just kind of a crazy new foundation for a new Hollywood sci-fi movie. In the story, Chiang recaps Bloom's and Harris's perspectives, and then he offers his own more detailed analysis. I won't spoil any other conclusions here, but the whole article is worth a read. If for nothing else, then it forces you to consider the limits of your own empathy and the small selfish acts we do on a daily basis.
That sounds really interesting. I'll definitely have to check that out. That link will also be in the description.
All right, next up is our main segment of the podcast, which we like to call Forward Thinking. In this segment, we'll dig deeper into one topic that's been on our minds this week. This episode, the topic of discussion is content creation. Smartphone adoption in the US was at roughly 81% towards the end of 2016. This means more people than ever have the ability to create content whenever and wherever, whether that be a video for YouTube or a post on your social network of choice. And the rate of smartphone usage and user-generated content really shows no signs of slowing down. That being said, in 2017, we really started to examine the impact of the content we're creating and consuming. The obvious cause of this self-examination was the role misinformation played in the 2016 election, but a growing number of studies are showing both the positive and negative impacts of our content creation and consumption on social media, which kind of really starts to further muddy the waters. Mari, why don't you kick us off? Where do you stand on this topic?
So I think it's really interesting because, you know, for so long, there was this kind of idea of like the 1% rule in terms of content creation, where 1% of the population is actually creating art and media and content. 9% is like editing and distributing that content, and then 90% of the general population is just consuming. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. A lot of people a lot more people than before are not only, going to YouTube or going to Vine or Twitter or Instagram, and creating content to make a living, which is definitely a lot more than they used to. But even just regular people like us are starting to see their personal social media feeds as content and as like even art or like at least some kind of creative expression. And so I think even the way that we relate to our own sort of like sharing of our personal lives, even if we're not trying to make money off of it, or be professionals, is changed just because of the way that social media forces us to like publish what we're doing and what we're thinking and kind of like, where we've been and pictures we take.
What have you done differently in terms of, you were talking about people starting to think of themselves as, actually publishing their own content. Mm-hmm. Do you think about your own content differently? And if so, what's the change?
Well, I think the main difference is that, let's say pre-2006, 2005, like before Twitter and before Facebook was really a big thing, I didn't have content. I didn't think of myself as having content at all. Like, I just kind of lived my life, and I had my thoughts, and I would hang out with my friends, and, I would talk to my friends on, like, AIM or, on the phone or in person, and we would have our jokes and stuff like that. But there was no idea of publishing any of that. There was no idea of, like, publishing my personal thoughts or, like, what I was doing, or, like, if I took a picture, it was pretty much just for me, or I would show it to my friends in person or something. But there just wasn't that idea of publishing, because the idea of publishing was still something that only professionals did.
Yeah, and it's kind of this slippery slope, at least for me it is, mm-hmm. where the more I think about posting, the more I feel like I need to feed the machine and mm-hmm. feed all the channels. And you were talking about like jokes between your friends. I get in this habit sometimes if I'm in a week where I'm contributing more to my channels, that if I have a good conversation, I like flag it in my head. Like, I need to post about this later. And my second thought is, I hope no one else posts about it, because I want to post about it. And I know you've said this before, but every single good joke, I'm like, this is it. This is the one I'm going to post. And it's going to blow up. Yeah. It's going to get all these retweets. I just got to hashtag it correctly.
Yeah, and you're going to be famous.
Yeah. And I'm going to be famous. Yeah. It's going to be my Salt Bay moment. And it's just going to be around this one joke between me and my friends. Mm-hmm. And obviously that never happens. Mm-hmm. Not to keep rambling on, but I posted this one conversation the other day, and I had that this is it moment. And
this is the one.
Yeah, this is the one. And the next morning, I like went to check it with relish. Like, I was so excited just to see on Twitter how many people saw it. It was like 18, which is absolutely nothing. So low. Yeah, I mean, literally no one. It's like 18 bots, and my mom saw it. And I was just like, I can't believe it. I thought that was it.
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's like, it's not, because I think that we, all humans have this desire to like share things and share our experiences and share like thoughts that we have that we think are funny, but it's just that before, unless you thought of yourself as somebody who, could, professionally do that, or it's just your nature to want to like share things with more than just your friends. And there are people who have always been like that. But, for people like you and me, before, you would just be like, oh, so-and-so is going to think this is really funny, so I'm going to, like, tell them when I see them, or I'm going to, like, email this to them, even in, like, early days of the internet. Or even before that, it would just be like, I'm just going to share this with, like, my one or two people who I know personally who would enjoy this. And that's very different from creating something that you're going to blast out to, like, hundreds or, potentially thousands of people. And like you said, I do think that now a lot of people, if not most people, if their Twitter or Instagram is unprotected and like anyone can see it, I think in the back of everybody's mind there's this idea that their thought could be so great that it catches on and it becomes famous and everybody sees it and they go viral, and then that's like so validating.
Yeah, like I I kind of get in that, like, you know, if a tree falls in the woods, does anyone hear it? That, like, suddenly becomes my thoughts. You know, it's like if I don't publish, no one's going to see.
It's like, did you really have the thought?
Yeah, it's like, did I really have the thought? Yeah. And even in, like, my personal journal, I think about that. It's like I'm writing to my future self. It's like, hey, just remember that this happened.
Yeah.
And that if I don't write about it, there's this assumption that I'm going to forget about it. Just like either personally or I'm not going to get credit for like, you know, like my genius tweet, you know, it's like, it's not, you know, it's going to go unrecognized, which would be a true disaster.
Right. Exactly. And and I do think that it changes the way you think about not just putting things out there and, like, you know, sharing things. Because I think, you know, even before social media, if you wanted to share something with your friend, like, oh, this funny thing happened to me, you would construct the whole story and, like, you know, present it in an entertaining way, just the way you would now if you were going to tweet about it. But I think that what social media does, and this idea of going viral, and this idea of, like, you're going to share something with lots and lots of people all at the same time, is that for a lot of us, and you see this on Instagram, you start doing things in real life with the intention of posting about it on Instagram or, like, tweeting about it. You know, it's not just like, oh, you're living your normal life and something interesting happened you want to share with your friend. It's like, oh, I know that this is going to make a good post, so I'm going to do it for that reason. And you enjoy it anyway, maybe, but it the content starts to come first.
Yeah, like I think in the first season of Girls, Hannah talks about this idea of, like, doing it for the story, like doing some kind of activity for the story.
Do it for the gram.
Do it, yeah. You're right. Like you do it for the gram, and I think that's one thing I do slightly less. I do kind of, you know, have a negative thought if, like, I feel like I missed a moment, like, shit, why did I eat that food so quickly? I could have taken a picture of that and gotten some, like, you know, like, social validation on the internet and maybe give me something to talk about at work on Monday, in which case I have nothing else to say.
I did that today.
Yeah.
We had poke today, and the poke place is very photogenic, and before the poke came out, I was like, oh, maybe I'll take a picture of it, you know, just in case, so I have some content. But then when it came out, I was so hungry, and it looked so good. I just wanted to eat it, and I just ate it all up. And when it was done, I was like, damn it, I could have taken a picture of it.
Well, and then it's really kind of a fight between my own self-loathing for wanting to structure my life around creating content, or my kind of negative thoughts around missing a good content opportunity. And I think maybe on a tangent, I kind of need to remind myself that, one, no one is waiting for my thoughts, except maybe for you, you know, like, you're kind of hopefully waiting for my hot take on whatever issue we're talking about. Yeah. But, you know, I think most of the world would be just fine without hearing my thoughts. And I think the other thing too is almost anything meaningful I'll put out there, it requires a great deal of time. And I see these stories on the internet that are gaining a lot of traction. I'm like, oh my God, why didn't I write that? You know, I could have done that, but realistically I couldn't have. I don't have the time to spend in crafting something or doing all this research.
Well, yeah, most of them, that's their job.
That's their whole job. Yeah. And so, like, anything I work on now, I'm just like, it's supposed to take a long time because this content is, you know, it's all fleeting. It's not going to get me anywhere.
Yeah. On the other hand, like, you know, we're kind of slightly talking about, like, the negative impact of people, you know, seeing their lives as content. But on the other hand, you know, I do think that if you are going to share something, you should kind of put some thought into it and make it something that's worth sharing. And, like, some people would argue that, you know, nothing on Instagram or Twitter is worth sharing. But I don't think that's true. I think a lot of things that people, just regular people like us, post on Twitter is really funny. And, you know, stuff that, like, you know, my friends of friends who I don't really know, but maybe I follow, post, like, I appreciate, you know? And I think that having this idea of having an audience does make you maybe think a little bit more carefully about what you post. But also, I think it encourages people to think more creatively. And you've talked about this before, where, you know, I'm kind of, you know, just walking around my life, but if I have this idea that, like, oh, maybe I'll post a picture today, I start seeing the world in a slightly different way. And that might be good or it might be bad, but I do think it makes me think a little bit more creatively and, you know, see the world as, like, something that could become art.
I do agree with you, and I think that idea of doing something for the story almost seems like a negative thing, or thinking about your life as a movie, I think, has a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, like, what other meaning am I going to create from my life if I don't create it on my own?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I don't want to act like I'm living in a movie, but if I don't apply a narrative to the day-to-day events, it's just kind of all meaningless. And so I think sometimes when I'm either thinking about getting a good photo on the way to work, or I'm thinking about wrapping up a funny conversation and it kind of just lives forever on the timeline that no one's looking at except for me, it does feel somehow meaningful, if for nothing else, to me.
Absolutely. And this is something I think about a lot, is the sort of natural human need and tendency and desire to create narratives, like what you were just talking about. And it's really impossible to escape, because and people have written about this, where, the ability to create narratives out of what is realistically just chaos, just the world, just molecules bouncing off of one another and random things happening, is kind of what sets apart, humans and like other animals, because we have this concept of the past, the present, and the future, and we're able to connect events that are really random and, connect them in a way that makes sense and like is logical, and we can learn from that. And that's how humans learn, is by connecting all of these events in a way that creates meaning. And so I think that humans are going to do that regardless, and that's what art is, really. For all of human history, that's what art has always been, is creating meaning and beauty out of, just nothing, just like chaos. And so, to say that Instagram is an extension of that might sound crazy, but I don't think there's anything wrong with finding the narrative and finding the creativity and the art in your everyday life.
Well, and like art informs culture and what people are talking about. And sometimes now what people are talking about and what culture is just what's trending. And what's trending is the sum of everyone's social posts and what topics rise to the top. And I feel like it's almost kind of a more democratic way to determine what culture is. It just rises organically from what people are talking about, as opposed to it being controlled by a couple different tastemakers.
That's interesting.
And I think your idea of the narrative, I mean, is more than just art and meaning. It's how we form government. The whole idea of money is just a narrative that this is important. It's how we form our society. So yeah, I mean, the fact that would extend to social totally makes sense.
Yeah. Did you want to say anything?
No, I was going to transition to something else, but I'll let you go.
Well, I got a couple more thoughts on this. I think putting the ability to create content into everybody's hands is usually seen as ultimately a negative thing. But I think that the reason people talk about it that way is there's a couple things. There's there's like the FOMO effect, right? Where if you're on Facebook or Instagram, you see other people, presenting the best version of their lives, and it makes you feel bad about yourself. Then there's the kind of flip side of that, where if you feel like you're being watched, it contributes to this sort of like, narcissism, and you start to value the content and the engagement, right? The attention more than your actual lived experiences, and that's a problem. But I think that for people who are, kind of self-aware, and being self-aware is something that you need to work on, but I think that that's everybody's responsibility, is to make themselves more self-aware. You can avoid falling into those traps, and like, as long as you are, really genuinely living your life first, and feeling things and experiencing things, and making sure that that's the more important part. Sharing stuff and expressing yourself, on social media, even if it's in these kind of trivial ways, like you just post a joke on Twitter, or you post silly pictures on Instagram or on your story, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think it's even, it could even be a positive thing to be able to give people the opportunity to express themselves and to be creative, whereas otherwise, that might be closed off to them. Also, it's a way for people to find communities and identify with each other and with themselves in ways that they might not have been able to otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, like any tool, it's all about how you use it, right? And I think you just mentioned a couple things I want to to at least build upon. For the FOMO effect, I think a lot has to do with who you follow.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that seems like a dumb thing, but even studies will show that you have more negative thoughts and negative self-worth and this fear that you're missing out if your network is much wider than your immediate friends and family.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's no sense of being connected. You're basically seeing a bunch of strangers who are maybe like around your age but are having a better time than you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of makes you feel more lonely.
Mm-hmm.
But if your network is closer and it's like your friends and family, you typically don't feel jealous of good friends when something good happens to them. You feel great and you feel more connected to them.
Yeah.
And so again, it kind of goes back to how the tool is used.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally forgot what else you were saying that I wanted to react to.
No,
but
good.
I think even that idea of self-expression is important. I mean, essentially when you had gatekeepers of content, whether it's Hollywood or the media, it projects their idea of what America is, what news is important.
Mm-hmm.
When that control starts to be taken away, you get different perspectives, which is usually a good thing. Sometimes it's obviously negative if there's hate speech or extremist content, but
or like false information.
Yeah.
But I think that's the thing is that, with all this stuff, and hopefully this is the way that things are going to start going, but I think that because we're now seeing how powerful, this democratization of expression almost, whatever, is where everybody is able to have a voice and everybody is able to, blast something out to thousands of people. I think every person needs to take it upon themselves to be responsible with what they consume and what they create, and to do the little, extra legwork and extra sort of like self-reflection when it comes to things that are, news that's just made up for some agenda or whatever, or like, pictures that are misleading, that contribute to, poor body image. And I hope that, as we move forward, people will start to become more literate in, consuming information and consuming content and, take more responsibility for what they see and what they share.
I totally agree. So ultimately positive on content.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with people being content creators as long as we're all responsible. And obviously that's where the problem is, because, humans have a problem with being responsible. But I have hope, I'm what do you call it? Optimistic. Yeah, I'm optimistic. I think it's also relevant to talk about the fact that, we're just two regular people, and we just decided to make a podcast. This is the first episode of this podcast. It's kind of, and I don't know, I think that we're also like pretty like media and content minded people. But I think this kind of does play into this conversation where, like, because we have the tools, and because we have kind of grown up, to a certain extent in this culture where, it's become normal to want to share things with a larger audience and to see yourself as somebody that creates content for a larger audience. That, if we were our age 20 years ago, we might not be doing this because, partly because we didn't have the tools and partly because, we wouldn't have had this mindset,
Yeah. And I know we talked about this before we even started, but I think the idea of not being part of the problem, right? I don't want to be someone who's spreading misinformation or I mean, for example, I see plenty of times people forward things to me, like people I know that are smart and thoughtful, and then I'll go on Snopes and it's totally wrong.
Of course. Yeah.
And I'm just like, I could have been the Snopes guy forwarding something to someone else, and it's just like I'm part of the problem. And so I'm hoping this is not part of the problem.
Yeah. We hope that the content that we're creating right now is helpful and you enjoy it. So let us know. Because we don't want to be just creating mindless content for no reason. But yeah, I think all of that is really interesting.
So yeah, I think content's great. I plan to keep watching a ton of stuff on Netflix and feeling good about it.
Me too. Speaking of Netflix.
So our final segment of the podcast is what we're calling Watch List. in this segment, we'll recommend one TV show or movie that's flying beneath the radar but worth checking out. So, Mari, what show are we recommending this week?
So, we, if you don't know, we're based in Chicago, and there's this TV show on Netflix that just aired its second season. It's called Easy, and it's set in Chicago, and it's made by this guy named Joe Swanberg, who is, if you're, like, into indie movies in Chicago, he's, like, a big Chicago director. He's known for doing this style called mumblecore. He's had a couple, kind of big-ish movies, like Drinking Buddies with Olivia Wilde. Got pretty popular. He's worked with Anna Kendrick and who's the girl from Girls?
Oh my God.
You know who we're talking about, the girl from Girls. And he's kind of gaining some notoriety. This is his first TV show. And if you've seen any of Joe Swanberg's movies, you know that the mumblecore thing sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. It's hard to, it's kind of hard to sustain. So what mumblecore is basically there's like an outline of the story of the movie, but every scene is improvised and all the dialogue is improvised just with the actors and with the director, Joe Swanberg. And it can be hard to sustain that style from, for a whole 90-minute to 2-hour movie. And that's generally what tends to happen with his movies is it kind of fizzles out at some point and there isn't a really like satisfying conclusion. But Easy, it seems, is actually a perfect format for this style of filmmaking because it's just these short episodes. What is it, 30 minutes to an hour?
Yeah, about 30 minutes.
They vary. And they're all these little separate stories that, they connect in some places, but it's mostly these like little separate stories about all these different people. It's set in Chicago. If you're a Chicago person, he shoots in all kinds of cool places in like Wicker Park and Lincoln Square. Baker Miller's in there a lot. Volumes Bookstore was in there. Everybody's Coffee was in there. So it's pretty fun to see these Chicago neighborhoods. But what we really love about it is that his style, this sort of, like improv, like mumblecore style, creates these little vignettes that are so real and so believable and so relatable. These characters just seem like your friends. They seem like real people that you know. And the episodes are talking about all kinds of different things, like all kinds of different experiences. One episode from the first season is this like lesbian couple, and the one girl is vegan and the other girl is, just wants her to like her so much that she pretends to be vegan. And it sounds silly, but it's so like sweet in the moment and just kind of like relatable how awkward she is. And all the episodes are like that, where it's just this super tiny little story with these really relatable characters, and you just get sucked into their lives.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it's a big relief. Sometimes when you're watching Netflix content, it's kind of designed for you to keep watching, which is kind of exhausting, where I just want to watch this 30 to 40 minute TV episode while I'm eating dinner, and then ends on a cliffhanger. I'm like, oh, God damn it. We got to watch the next one. But like, I also need to get to sleep. Mm-hmm. And these nice 30 to 40 minute episodes are just perfect for something to break up the day and make you think without sucking you down the rabbit hole where it's going to take over your whole afternoon.
Mm-hmm. And, it's a really different type of show than most other shows out there. But we really like it. We really like the style. We really like the vibe. So a lot of, newer actors, some of them you might have seen in a couple of places. Once in a while, there's like a really famous person, like Orlando Bloom is in one of the episodes. But, it's up and coming actors, great performances, great little stories. The first season is a little bit hit or miss, but it's like mostly really good. The second season is mostly really, really good. And it's on Netflix for free. Only like 20 episodes. 18 episodes total.
Yeah, and given how short they are, if you want to binge it, you really can, and you're going to feel awesome.
Yeah, for sure. So that's our recommendation for this week. It's called Easy. It's on Netflix. You should check it out.
That's it for us.
Yeah, that was our first episode. Again, this is Forward. It's spelled FWD:. This is going to be on SoundCloud as well as on iTunes, Google Play Music, all the usual places. We're going to try to do this every week, and hopefully we will. If not, sorry. But thanks for listening. We'll talk to you again soon.